Hello and good evening. My name is David Magyar, and on behalf of the City Architecture Forum, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's talk and discussion on the groundbreaking 6 Orsman Road building for Storey, British Land's flexible workspace offer. Tonight we are broadcasting from the building, our second attempt at doing so. Apologies again to those who had tuned in last time when technology conspired against us. I've got to admit I'm very excited about this project. What is special about it for me is what it represents in terms of the here and now, and indeed future, of how we approach the design and construction of buildings, and how use of the workplace is changing. For those unfamiliar with the project, 6 Orsman Road is an inspiring and successful marriage between sustainable design and innovation, where cross-laminated timber, CLT, has been used in combination with steel for the building structure and for many of the building finishes, bringing about significant benefits to this construction process, specifically the build and program, and to the environment. I think the result is a unique architecture and a flagship workplace. Its innovation goes further than that, in that the building is demountable to ensure as much as possible can be reused or recycled when we no longer want to work in offices, I guess. Turning to this evening's panel of speakers, I'd like to introduce Andrew Waugh of award-winning architectural practice Waugh Thistleton, designers of the building and pioneers in the use of CLT, and Stewart Whiting, head of product at Storey, the client for the project, who are to be applauded for their faith, foresight, and fortitude in commissioning this project. Andrew will begin with a 10-minute presentation on design and the design process, followed by a further 10 minutes from Stewart on the client's perspective and how this building will be used and be operated. After that, we should have just about enough time for a brief Q&A discussion before finishing around 7:30 p.m. If you'd like to submit questions during the course of the talk or immediately afterwards using the Q&A button located on the Zoom taskbar, you should be able to do so. So, to Andrew now, and the architect's story.
Thanks, David. Can we have the next slide? Thanks. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you, David. So, I'm Andrew Waugh from Waugh Thistleton Architects, and we are an architecture practice based in East London, in Shoreditch. We've been around for 20 years or so in Shoreditch, and this is me at the front in the red. And for the last, for about the last 15, 18 years, we have been building and researching and drawing buildings in timber. Next one, please.
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
Is that my watch?
Yeah.
Okay.
All the technology for this
All the
presentation.
technology, all the time.
Live broadcasting, folks.
Sorry, guys. This is Orsman Road. I just want I live just very close to here. And this is an area that's undergone great change and great transformation. It was certainly, when I first moved here in the late 80s, was an area which was very industrial and full of an industrial architecture, but also mixed and interspliced with lots of residential too. But something definitely about a kind of an architecture around here which was very much about its function and expressing its function. Next, please. So that's our site there. You can see bound in red. So Orsman Road directly to the south, quite a north-south axis on the plan. Regent's Canal to the north there, just a little bit west of Kingsland Road. Thank you. Next one. Thanks. So the building sits opposite Canal Basin. It turns a corner on Orsman Road. There are taller buildings to the west and lower buildings to the east. Locally listed buildings to the east. And the existing building was a derelict single-story warehouse. Next one, thanks. So the first thing we looked at was kind of just in terms of sort of forming a mass on the site. was to reduce that mass to kind of mediate between the taller buildings to the west, the lower ones to the south, to look at how we could turn the corner by moving the top bit to the top part of the form against the lower part of the form, and then by putting in a series of ribbon windows and open spaces across the facade. Thank you. So then you can see here on the top 3 floors how that begins to sort of accept that corner, and then to take this view through from the road through to the canal, and then on the back on the canal on the north elevation to have a much more open elevation, because you don't have the issues obviously with the solar gain, overshadowing, etc. So you can have a much larger kind of glazed facade, but to keep that kind of vertical emphasis on the glazed facade to the north. Thank you. So that idea of being able to kind of take the building through, both in terms of ventilation, in terms of sunlight and daylight, and also in terms of view, that sort of penetrability through the building was also an important aspect of how the plan was laid out. Thank you. But it also was really a kind of sort of an exercise of efficiency, if you like, because at the time when we were first designing the building, the value of commercial floor space in the area was so low that the building had to be really incredibly efficient. So it really was a kind of constant exercise of maths, moving kind of like 1 square meter here, etc., to get that. So we're about 85% efficient across the plan. And you can see here, this is the penetration of daylight into the plan from both the north and the south. Thank you. It's an important part of our practice, as I was saying earlier, is looking at both the climate impact of the materials that we use, the construction processes that we go through in our industry, in our profession, but also understanding what the other benefits of using timber are beyond the very obvious and now kind of well accepted climate carbon benefits, but also thinking about the fact that buildings that are healthy to be in, where there are many natural materials around you, where there's an expression of those natural materials, also has been clearly demonstrated, proven to be a healthier kind of place to be in, a healthier workplace, one where people are less stressed, where they're more able to focus, and from a tenant's perspective, from an office kind of perspective, actually kind of will work harder and have better concentration levels and are less likely to leave their employment. So all these benefits to being in a timber office was certainly, very kind of like were great drivers behind making this space not only this building not only a lower carbon building, but also a better, more pleasant place for the occupier to be, a healthier place for them to be. So we looked at the building in different construction methods and appraised with our client, with a QS, what the cost and program benefits would be of doing a concrete and steel building, an all timber building, and a steel and timber building. And the castellations of the beams that you can see behind me were what allowed us to put the services through, the holes in the beams allowed us to put the services through, and that allowed us to compress the section of the building by about 300 mil for every floor. So over 6 floors, it's about sort of 1.82 meters compression over the whole building. And that allowed us to get an additional floor on the top, working with the local authority. So that hybrid, next please, of steel and timber is where we got to, as explained in this section from Ingenuity, the engineer. So what we were able to do was to, next please, was to plan out a building which used the timber for all the shear forces. So the floor plates, the floor slabs act as a kind of diaphragm, and the core acts to keep the shear forces, and then the steel itself, it's only taking the gravitational load. And because the timber floor slabs are about 20% of the weight of a concrete floor slab, the actual gravitational load is vastly reduced. So you get a very slim steel structure supporting that gravitational load. Thank you. Also, we looked at solar gain on the front, on the south, and so we stepped the glazing back at the lower levels just with the depth of the building because of shading from adjacent buildings, and then on the higher levels using those balconies to offset the glazing further back and to give an opportunity for that sort of indoor-outdoor space. Thank you. So we achieved planning consent in 2016 for this building. And there's the view at the back from the canal. Next one, thanks. So the first panel went up. There you can see that's the core going up. Next one, thank you. And there you can see the CLT at the front of the building, providing additional kind of rigidity to the front of the elevation. The party walls were made of a prefabricated insulated panel, which came in and was placed directly into the steel frame on the sides of the building. Thank you. There you can see as the building is going up. So that's our smoke shaft there in the middle and the WCs to the left. Thank you. And there the roof deck. And in fact, just in there now is where we're sitting just now. And they're taken from the east looking west. You see just as the steel structure you can see there going up. The entire steel structure is bolted. There are no welds in the steel structure, again giving it that kind of opportunity for adaptability over its life. Next one, thanks. So, Stewart.
Hi everyone. So Stewart from Storey. So as David introduced, we're British Land's flexible workspace business, and for context it probably just makes sense to spend a minute or two on exactly what that means. So we were set up 4 years ago really as a hybrid between the co-working service world and the conventional lease, noticing that there were a lot of companies that fell in the middle in terms of their requirement in between these two things, that needed that sort of sense of permanency that you get from a conventional lease, that sense of it sort of being a proper office and something that's very much yours and personalised to your brand and your culture and the way that you work, but also need an element of the flexibility and the ease of some of the management you traditionally would only get from the flex world and the co-working spaces. So our typical customer size is around 50 people. The Storey as a system, as we built it, works down to companies of around 20, and our largest is about 250. So typically slightly larger companies than you might find in the flex world. And we see that in terms of the customers that come to us, they're very much looking at both of those worlds and sort of see us really being at this point in the middle. We split those customers up really into three groups. So we've got a lot of scale-up companies who have grown up in that whole co-working world, have never signed a lease. They've only had licenses, they've had month-to-month flexibility, but they've hit a point they really feel like they want their own space. We, as part of British Land, and this for us is fascinating, we provide an element of corporate flex for existing British Land customers, allowing people to sort of take both of these products side by side in the same building as well in some instances. And then we're also the London office for a lot of large international organisations. Again, because we can give this sense of ease, this element of flexibility as you're setting up in the UK, but it's very much your name on the door of a big building downstairs, and you have that sort of sense of presence that you might expect for a much larger organisation. So Orsman Road's the first building that we built we bought actually specifically for Storey. So we've got a remit to get to about 10% of the British Land portfolio everywhere, and then in key areas, just looking at how we support that with some interesting buildings that fit really well with what we do. So we came across this building. Andrew had already been working on it with a previous developer, and it really spoke to a lot of what we want to do from a Storey point of view. The sustainable nature of the building really is in line with what we wanted to achieve everywhere. The flexibility, not only in terms of the way the floor plates have been organised, but this demountable nature and this sort of kit of parts element that we actually talk about from Storey. We could really see similarities in the way the whole building had been constructed from the beginning. And it really felt the building we really loved, the size really fit, the area. We also fell in love with the sort of sense of calm with the canal and sort of being able to provide a slightly different space. You're not right in the heart of something, you're close to it, but you've got space to think, which increasingly is something that we think is an important thing to have as well. And really early on, we met Andrew, and it was totally the right thing to do to carry on the interiors with him and the team. Andrew lives on the road, so we knew he was going to have to walk past the building every day. So he definitely wanted to be right. But the way they were thinking was right. The initial material palette, actually, they were all materials that were all either already used or had wanted to use in projects. And that sort of sense of alignment and collaboration from the beginning of the project was really evident, and I think has allowed us to get to a place that is we're certainly really happy with. So as we sort of move through, we've got a number of images of the building. I just sort of talk over them, give a little bit of sense about what we do, and just sort of a bit of a journey through the building and the interiors that have gone into them, sort of taking on from where Andrew left off. So this shot we've already seen just at the back of the building, so we can probably move on to the front of the building. As it is now, subtly different on the inside, and this view down the canal, you can sort of see how big a part of building life this canal really is, and how busy it is as well. I think if we move on, we'll get to the entrance. So this was originally being set out as a pretty typical, well, not typical, but a cafe building.
Yep.
From a Storey point of view, we think about the communal space in the building in a sort of slightly different way. We have a little bit more because at a company size of around 50, it kind of makes sense to share some of those larger facilities. So in the space next to us right now, there's a space where 40, 50 of you can get together for a presentation. Some larger meeting rooms of sort of 20 people, they're useful some of the time, although I imagine if from a design point of view and design team meetings, they're required a lot of the time, but for other businesses maybe sort of slightly less. So share those elements and everything else goes within the unit. And then also really thinking about all the communal space that's left. All customers effectively end up paying for this in some way, so how do we really maximize the use of that? And really sort of questioning what a lobby is and whether lobby is even an appropriate term anymore. This really becomes a range of amenities, and we have the ability to service these as well to add value to the customers in the building, to make it more efficient for them and for us and for the world around us as well. So in the ground floor here, we ended up actually extending the communal space at the back to get the connection to the canal, which was a really nice thing to have that from the beginning. Creating a additional space for anyone in the building to come and work from that might be sort of slightly louder than their office environment, with a unit of 3,500 square feet, which is sort of pretty average for Storey. Quite hard to create that range of environments actually within the unit, so to have something that's a little bit buzzier. And also to think about our customers. So if you're going to come and base yourselves at this building, how do you create spaces that actually, if you're coming all the way from Victoria or somewhere else, you're like, well, actually I want to come and work with Andrew for the day and collaborate with him because I can get food from the cafe, I can sit down by the canal, I can come to the meetings on the top and get a view of the rest of the city. I can actually base myself for the day and sort of have space for that sort of client collaboration, which is not necessarily right within the unit from a privacy point of view, but definitely adjacent to it and sort of part of the whole experience. The cafe downstairs, we're actually working with the Shoreditch Trust next door, who are going to be extending their blue marble training scheme to train local people up in hospitality skills through this cafe, so they can then go and get jobs elsewhere. And again, just thinking about that really talked to the sort of sustainable things that we were talking about within the building, but just felt like the right thing to do as well. So, and again, what we want to really give the impression of in the ground floor of these spaces that, again, it's a proper office building. We're not walking into a co-working lounge. So the names, I think if you move on to the next slide, you'll see, the names are on the board in reception as you would expect in a conventional building, and there are fewer of them. I think we can have up to 17 or so customers within the building. We'll probably land around about 10 on average over the life cycle at any one time. But their name is there, right next to the bike storage, where you cycle straight into the front door, put your bike in, and then you're not going in round the bins at the back. On the next slide, just another shot of the cafe, which you've seen, and then this lounge that we talked about at the back, just the generosity of sort of trying to give this connection to be able to sit with a coffee with the swans going by to everyone in the building and having that washover effect, rather than it just being one unit that might attract a premium at the back, and a sort of real density of spaces for people to sit onto this point of it really needing to add value everywhere. And as you move on, you'll see just this spot at the back, which is I spent a bit of time there over the summer actually, and it was a real treat to sit there with a coffee and a laptop. Moving through, you'll then see the space that we're sitting in now on the top floor. And again, this was originally meant to be an office unit, but just wanted to give this to everyone and to have this space actually a slightly quieter space. So we've got sort of general office ambience, and then a slightly buzzier space and a slightly more reflective space with a space to think with sort of views across the rest of the city there, which is actually surprisingly close. On the next slide, again, larger meeting rooms. These are sort of shared amenities that Storey would typically put into these spaces. And yeah, again, from a materiality point of view, all the furniture that you've seen throughout, we really wanted to carry on I think we were all aligned on this sort of, use of natural materials.
Absolutely. So,
timber furniture, joinery made locally, all of the fabrics, even down to the fabrics, are all natural walls rather than anything synthetic. And actually, I think if you move on, you might on the next slide, these are the larger meeting spaces that we've got on the top floor. But we'll see at some point, we actually needed to add a stair at one point in the project to get to a density that we needed to potentially get to. We're sitting around it right now. I don't know if you can see the table in the front. This furniture was actually made out of the CLT slab that was cut out. That happened remarkably quickly.
Yeah.
Went to try and photograph the process, and sort of 48 hours later, I know we've done it. Sort of 3 people, which was sort of amazing from a flexibility point of view, and actually interestingly for the future, how we think about maybe three-dimensional flexibility through the building rather than just on one level. We think could be fascinating too. So office units. So from a Storey point of view, we include the desks and the task chairs because we can put in height adjustable desks and good quality task chairs, and a customer can come into the building for 2 years and just pay for 2 years the amortization of that rather than for much longer. And at this point, Storey sort of starts to become the circular economy a little bit as well. The fact that a customer is passing through this building and using part of this fit out, it's not moving, which is more sustainable. It's being passed on from customer to customer, and just the whole thing's starting to be used in a slightly more efficient way. So we keep everything relatively simple from that point of view because it needs to work for a number of people, and a lot of thought goes into things like desk sizes, so that you can make sure that's going to work from everyone from being a call center to sort of architects and developers to traders, and getting all these things really as right as possible for as many people as possible to realize those efficiencies. As you move on, you'll see, and then the ability to not just think about desks in a room, which is a fundamental difference between Storey and some of the co-working spaces. Really at this size, you've got your own meeting rooms in there, you've got your own breakout areas, and we can start to think about the different elements of workplace that need to happen within these spaces. So we've got a whole menu of furniture that people can choose from. And on the next slide, what you'll start to see is that actually one of the biggest challenges we have from a Storey point of view, and we develop this with Andrew a little bit further as well, is companies of 20 to 50, suddenly you're at the point that you want your own meeting rooms and private offices and phone booths within the unit. But we need to be able to deliver that in a way that's totally flexible, because that requirement's going to change customer to customer and over the life cycle of that customer being within the space as well, which is a problem that hadn't really existed in the flex world previously, because it'd be desks in a room and everything else had been shared, and hadn't necessarily been addressed fully in the conventional world because people were fitting something out for a much longer period of time and you'd have the one customer in there for much longer. So we developed a system which is sits on a 1.5 metre grid with all the M&E pre-considered, so we can actually reconfigure that space over time. So set up at the moment, that's an 8-person office and an 8-person meeting room and a 6-person meeting room. That could all be reconfigured to phone booths and one private office if you wanted to, and done with a petitioning company, so we can pretty much do that over a weekend with minimal adjustment to the M&E, which again, from a sustainability point of view, but also a cost point of view, allows that to happen, to make sure that space is then adapted for productivity rather than sitting in a space that isn't fully functioning. And we're actually developing that further at the moment, looking at how we bring sensors into the spaces to help customers really understand how that element's working. On the next slide, T-points again within all the units, which again doesn't sound like much, but actually to be able to have that from only having a shared T-point before enables you to really start to think about your company culture around food. Is that just sort of basic tea and coffee? Is it beers in there? Is it is it sort of a healthy snacking program? Do you decide to eat together? And this is sort of a big shift. And again, we've been able to do that because of the way the building had already been considered with multiple T-points and how the floor plates could be split up to be able to actually put these in from scratch. In a way that I think you can sort of really beautifully sort of pick materials in a cheap way to be able to sort of a good value way to be able to make that happen. Sorry, slight slip there. As you move on, just again sort of materiality. We talked about the tables. Again, Clayworks is a great material that we've used in other projects, and I think you guys have used before as well, which takes some of the toxins out of the air as well as being a natural material and adjusts humidity as well, that timber already does. And we sort of talked about these elements before, just sort of looking at sort of classic pieces of furniture that are made in really sustainable ways throughout. And then on the next slide, you'll see the roof terrace, which is just a really nice thing to have again for everyone. And I'm not sure if we've got another slide which shows it, but again, really think about this as a space for people to work from. So shading, which has actually just gone in, so you can actually sit there on those hot days and actually work rather than sort of going up there and having a screen glare. And all the planting in there, instead of just being evergreen, actually we've planted herbs in there and vegetables in there and fruit in there, which people are happy, were welcome to sort of go up and pick for themselves, or maybe actually start to tend if they want to over time as well, and just sort of a thing that people can sort of come together and do in the building, and it's better for the bees as well, which is an important thing for all of us right now. That, I think, is pretty much it. I think the final slide is a photograph of Andrew's beautiful stair on the ground floor, which was cut through, which exactly, sort of encouraging active design as well as solving another problem at the same time.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both for a terrific presentation on a building that I think is very relevant, extremely well designed, every last detail thought through. So thank you very much for that. I guess it's time for Q&A and for us to kick off a bit of discussion. I'll be looking at my computer in a moment for what's come from the floor, but I guess I'll kick it off really. And a question to you both, so feel free, one or other of you, to answer first. Where to from here, really? How do you both see the future, both of the workplace and, I guess, Andrew, CLT? Storey, I mean, are you going to continue to be associated with this kind of project, groundbreaking, interesting, appealing to a new market, I guess, that'll be coming out post-COVID? And Andrew, will you be championing CLT? I know there's been talk of certain obstacles to the wider use of CLT, so maybe you could tell us a bit more about that too.
Certainly.
I mean, so from a Storey point of view, we're continuing to grow on BL's portfolio and sort of other buildings that we're looking at too. The next project, actually 100 Liverpool Street, we're really interested how this model integrates really closely with the rest of the building. And that's not just the physical space, it's really the technology and the services and everything as well. And that's enabling actually us to open up some of the communal larger meeting facilities to everyone across the whole of the building. And we're starting to see people move into a building because they've got the ability to take slightly less space, because some of those shared amenities are there. So there we've got much larger facilities. We've got lots of 20-person meeting rooms. We've got an event space for 150 people. We've got some of these additional sort of work zones and settings, and that's done in a way that feels seamless. Storey doesn't really seem to exist there as a level of ground at all. It's just 100 Liverpool Street. We've been able to enable that. And I think seeing how people can start to occupy space when they've got that ability to look at flex in conjunction and shared amenity in conjunction with the rest of the space, for me is fascinating. So that's carrying on, at speed, and we're looking at moving in that way. Generally, from a Storey point of view, especially at the moment, I think we sort of feel that we're not too prescriptive about the individual spaces. We've built enough flexibility into them that actually it doesn't really matter how you want to occupy them. And we've got the ability to, as you sort of saw, change the enclosed space within there sort of relatively cheaply and efficiently, as well as sort of from menus of items, sort of look at how you look at the rest of it. From a sustainability point of view, we only really see that getting more important, and something we're really trying to sort of pull through. But yeah, flexibility and sustainability really, in short, it's two things that we see more and more demand for.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that as well. I mean, what we're seeing from office occupiers is a greater ambition for that kind of thing, a greater ambition for sustainability, a greater understanding of the impact of the building, not just in operation, but also what the building's made of. And I think that kind of, running very much hand in hand, parallel to that, is the idea of kind of wellness within these buildings, is the kind of, the opportunities for kind of health and well-being, the well beyond well kind of idea. And I think that kind of chimes very closely with a sort of, with a kind of post-pandemic or a living with a pandemic world. What kind of changes are we going to see in offices? What kind of changes are we going to see in people's attitude to work? And I think that actually that this building, what's really interesting is actually thinking about, the kind of the clues that have been given through aiming for a more sustainable kind of future in terms of construction are actually really, really similar to what we need to be doing in terms of just the kind of wellness and well-being in buildings. And I think kind of in a sort of post-pandemic world, we will be making demands on our spaces about kind of being in more natural spaces, being in better daylit spaces, better ventilated spaces, spaces that are more generous and open, places where you kind of, maybe you do kind of, I know I read some statistic today that 87% of people in white collar work worked from home for an element of the week in August. And you can see that going forward, actually spaces like this were opportunities to kind of to come and go more freely, to kind of have the whole office in a space, and then perhaps less of the office in a smaller space. So you kind of, sort of downsizing but up-speccing to a space like this is actually, you can see that kind of, that sort of change in what we're looking for from office spaces evolving. And as we've all seen, I think that what we're learning at the moment is that we can make changes a lot faster than we realized that we were going to be able to. And you see that definitely in an office market which is much more ambitious, much more dynamic than a residential market. You're seeing that ambition really kind of coming to the, kind of being displayed by a new architecture. So it's really exciting, I think.
Yeah.
And building on that, I think, people actually have a choice about where they're going to work from. You've really got to put a lot of effort into the building to get
absolutely. Absolutely.
And that sort of, it's sort of more carrot and stick, arguably, for some organisations moving forward. So how do you really create spaces that people, A, feel that they're more productive and are more productive, but actually really want to be in?
Yeah.
I think we're
want to leave home for.
Yeah.
Exactly. To commute for, and then what activities are those? Is that then for as well? I think is something we're sort of really looking at. I think the sort of collaboration point feels pretty key. I think everyone's aligned on that. That sort of element of sort of chance encounter and social. The social element is very much there, and just sort of creating spaces as well as services that enable that. And actually, some of the customers we're talking to at the moment, it's as much about how we actually change the level of service as the space to enable that. They're more interested in what might happen from an F&B point of view within the space, and how we support that with additional reception staff and office management to facilitate.
That's interesting to know. Okay, I've limbered you both up now. Here come the hardcore questions. So I'll turn to a few of these. Forgive me if I don't read all of them, but the first is from Gail McKean. What is the evidence for the well-giving properties of timber buildings? I guess this one's for you, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, the evidence, I mean, there's a few different studies that have happened. One which was commissioned by the Australian government and Australian timber industry, which is by Planet Arc on planetarc.com or .oz, I'm not sure. But that's a great report that's worth looking into. Which is just talking about, I mean, I think it's a few things. I think there's a kind of, the feeling of general well-being is about the kind of, the hygroscopic nature of the materials, such that it's kind of moderating the humidity in the atmosphere around you. I think that being near natural materials, just the visual kind of, that visual instinctive recognition of a natural material around you gives you a sense of well-being and health. And I mean, I live in a CLT house, and I like it a lot. I mean, it definitely does feel different. I mean, it's kind of, and just even being here, I think it's just, you get that kind of feeling of just sort of being in a more relaxing surrounding. It's kind of, it's quite intangible.
Well,
there is a smell.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a real danger.
Yeah.
Right? We live in this world, we sort of look at photographs,
sure.
but actually sort of being in there are all these other senses, and there's definitely more coming from it. That doesn't point
It's
to the
in fact
evidence.
the missing sense, isn't it? The smell.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. Sticking on the timber theme, this one's from Richard Saxon. Some clients steer clear of CLT for fear of insurance problems. Is that realistic or misguided?
I think that it is both. I think the thing is, it's you have to. This is a different way of building. We're building a different building. I think these buildings, I'm confident these buildings are safe buildings, but at the same time, obviously, we're working with a combustible material, so we need to work closely. And we're working with a new material, material with relatively, we have about 500-600 buildings in the UK made of CLT, so it's not that new. But I think it's important to engage with the insurance industry early on. So what we always suggest to clients and suggest to to contractors is to engage with insurance brokers really at stage one, because our encounters with the insurance agency have demonstrated that they haven't really understood the level to which, you know, we take kind of precautions and we take care and we kind of instigate all this. So I think building those kind of collaborative relationships when you're doing something new is imperative.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it hasn't stopped us. And we're still building lots of timber buildings, so it is possible, it is feasible.
Thank you. Lily de Watteville, were any changes made to the design stroke layout after you moved in and started using the building? Were there any welcome or unwelcome surprises?
We've sort of been in the process of opening over the summer, which has been a slightly strange time. So, I mean, whenever we open a site, we spend as much time in there as possible to really sort of, you know, get a sense of what's working and what isn't. Especially as we're rolling out sort of future sites, because we want to learn from that and sort of improve. You know what? So much. There was a lot of attention to detail the whole way through the project. There's not much that we've actually really shifted. It's been the sort of small, you know, move a light fitting up 6 inches.
The staircase was the big one, wasn't it? The staircase was the big change.
Right. Well, so I mean, yeah, but I mean that was a change, I guess, when we sort of, as soon as we started talking about the project. That's not sort of not since we sort of moved in. There were definitely like a bunch of changes from when you had sort of a cafe brief before to us wanting to sort of look at Storey, which were, you know, there's elements about these sort of shared amenities, like that sort of Storey spine system that we were looking at putting in. Just a sort of a slight change in sort of approach to customer, and the stair, which was a big one, which, you know, frustratingly sort of inhibited some of the flexibility within the building, which is a little bit of a shame, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think again, kind of post-COVID, to have 2 big staircases in the building, 2 big open generous staircases in the building, is also a really good idea as well. The kind of circulation around the space feels a lot more generous when you're in here now. So I think that's worked out really well for us.
And what's really nice about the building is this sort of loose fit nature, the feeling of generosity is in the amenities that are on offer, and somehow doesn't feel anything fixed about the workplace around it. So it doesn't feel conventional at all. It feels very relaxing, you know, quite almost domestic in feel, and yet you are in a workplace.
Good. So, that's exactly how it's supposed to feel.
It's a great first impression.
Great.
Nailed it. Thanks.
Yeah. Did we record that bit? Because we could definitely do with using that somewhere.
I could get the commission afterwards. This is one's an anonymous question.
It's my mum, probably.
How will you deal with the restrictions of the new codes about timber due to Grenfell Tower?
So the new codes are for residential buildings only, not for commercial buildings. So it hasn't impacted at all in terms of what we're looking at for commercial buildings. In fact, we are very busy building and designing commercial timber office buildings, both here and in Europe. I mean, it is frustrating because the rest of the world have changed their building regulations to promote the use of timber, and only in the UK have we changed our building regulations contrary to evidence, contrary to research. We've changed our building regulations. I mean, you know, the one thing that was exempted from the change in building regulations were PVC windows, which burnt and fell out and allowed the fire to spread at Grenfell. So I think that, you know, this is one of those things, I think was a fairly cynical, knee-jerk reaction to Grenfell. The Hackett report said that the one thing that didn't need changing were the building regulations, and the only thing that has been changed are the building regulations. So I'm sure that, you know, I mean, it has instigated further testing and further research, which is great. Yeah. And when that research and testing comes back, in 6 months or so, then I think we'll see a change back in the building regulations. But it's frustrating because it leaves 1,000, you know, or so apartments in difficulty in terms of mortgages and stuff, including my own. But it's also, I think, it's unnerving, and it changes the perception, you know. And as I say, you know, the impact of construction on the climate is so massive. and we need to be shifting away from a concrete and steel dominated industry towards a kind of bio-based industry. So it's a setback, and it's frustrating, for sure. And it's ignorant as well, which is really annoying.
Well, our anonymous attendees followed up with a question related to that. How much CO2 emissions have been added to the building due to the steel structure?
That's a good question. I don't know the exact figure for that off the top of my head. I apologise. But yes, an amount. And it was, the thing about the steel structure is, it's obviously, you know, in the UK, structural steel is 90% recycled from recycled sources. The steel that we use are all standard sections. They're all bolted, not welded. So you have the adaptability, you have the kind of kit of parts that Stewart was referring to earlier, kind of nature of the building. And also because the steel itself is carrying such a reduced weight in terms of, I mean, you know, in a typical kind of steel and concrete building, the steel is carrying the vast weight of the concrete floor slabs, whereas here that weight is reduced by 80%. So the steel itself, I don't know how much you can see in the background here, but the steel itself, the sections are incredibly slim, and the columns themselves as well are very sparse. So the answer, I suppose, is more than we'd want, but less than you might think.
Does it increase future flexibility, actually?
Yeah, it does, absolutely.
So, yeah, you know, in terms
It
of,
does.
you know, if this building's here for a long time.
Yeah, it does, certainly, because because there's so little structure, that does allow us to move walls around, build new walls, etc. Take out beams, put new ones in. Yeah, definitely.
Right, a couple of questions from Maria Herrera, a CAF member who's with the City of London. Hi, what is the height limit, number of stories for this type of hybrid timber structure?
I mean, you know, as high as you want to
Yeah,
go.
there's the tall buildings.
Tall buildings. I mean, the thing is, I mean, there are a couple of questions around that, really. It's how high should you go? You know, because if you like the sketch, you know, the basis of this is around sustainability, and tall buildings are not really very sustainable. You know, they cause lots of overshadowing, and they're difficult for transport systems. They're not very efficient in terms of net to gross, all that kind of thing. And you know, post-pandemic, what are we going to be thinking about? Traveling long distances in elevators. I think that's interesting too. So, but really, it's more about the building's form, I think, than it is about the structural capacity. So, you can go incredibly high like this. It's very light. So the problem that you have is really the lightweight nature of the structure, and so that would mean that the ratio of the width of the base to the height of the building would need to increase.
Right.
Yeah, does that make any sense?
It
So
does.
more of a ziggurat
Yeah.
than a kind of tall, thin diving board.
Yeah. Well, Maria's follow-up question is, how does the CLT floor perform acoustically?
That's a great question.
Does something else need to be added to the top? Any feedback from users acoustics?
Yes. So really, we went to see. This is the third building we've done with this sort of structure. This is much bigger and much more ambitious than the previous ones. But we went to see people that have been in occupation of these buildings for some time, talked to them about the acoustics, and there was no negative feedback at all about the acoustics. I mean, the thing is, you know, timber is very good at high frequency noise separation, but not so good at impact because it's light. So, you know, the impact sound does carry through. But this building has got a raised floor, and the raised floor are on resilient pads. And so actually that impact sound is taken out a lot by the resilient pads underneath on the raised floor. So we haven't had any kind of negative feedback on that, and acoustic separation hasn't seemed to be a problem. I mean, again, you know, when you're in occupation in the building, you're generally in occupation of an office building with other people around you, you know, with other people above, but with other people in the office space. So actually feeling kind of like opportunities for absolute silence in office spaces and generally shared office spaces are not generally what we kind of assume from an office building. But having said that, no, we've got no problems. And certainly I can tell you from at home,
Yeah.
I never hear my neighbours ever. So, you know, it's pretty, in every residential building we've done where we've had to meet acoustic separation in building regs in Part E, we've always exceeded what was called for in Part E by some margin.
And that wouldn't be with a raised floor?
No,
those
not at all.
exactly.
That's with
without-
direct impact.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing about timber again is it's one of those areas that needs further research. But certainly, I mean, we're referred to existing occupiers, and all the feedback we've had has been incredibly positive. And also, there are lots of interesting things you can do to do that anyway. So, another project we have in London at the moment, we're actually putting sand on top of the CLT slab in order to help act as an acoustic damper, where we've got particularly long spans in that building. And so we're just using general sharp sand on top of the CLT slab.
Right.
Because obviously you can hoover it up afterwards, so it's kind of adaptable, easy,
Fascinating
low
stuff.
carbon.
I see the CAF committee are out in force. Javier Aguillo Iran has asked, does working in timber allow you to save in other items? Is it cheaper in the overall sum?
I mean, from my perspective, yes. If you design a building as a timber building, then there are opportunities for cost efficiency. If you get a standard kind of assessment of cost for a building and you take out concrete and you put in timber, then your bottom line is always going to look more expensive. But it's about all the other savings and all the other efficiencies that are involved. So, for instance, there are far less finishes necessary in this building. It's far easier. If you imagine, if you talk to the guys that came in here and fitted the ventilation system, you can imagine going through fitting a ventilation system with a cordless screwdriver. It's a very different process from fitting a ventilation system with a hammer drill, and going one after another, hammer drilling into concrete. How long that takes, how unpleasant that is. So what we do is we engage early with subcontractors, we bring them to buildings, we show them how easy it is, and we lean on them to reduce their costs accordingly. And it's so much faster as well, is the other thing. So much quicker to do, because you're not waiting for things. You can build a CLT building in the snow. You don't have to stop like with concrete. It has to be a certain temperature, certain humidity outside in order to be able for the concrete to set. You can do a timber building. You can build a timber building all year long. So you've got those kind of, it's a more regular, faster, more reliable construction program.
I mean, sort of really picking up on Javier's question, do you think one of the blockers, if you like, for the use of CLT has been a contractor's lack of knowledge of the material and the advantages that you've expressed, or maybe it's a combination of clients?
No, I think it's actually, the contractors are never terribly keen on it. Because they've got a way of doing things. We've been building buildings the same way for 100 years. They've got everything sorted. All the costings are fairly kind of, well understood and kind of pleasantly opaque. So it's. I think that when you build a timber building, just like you can see around you, everything is incredibly obvious. There really aren't any hidden costs. There aren't any hidden items. Concrete is very much more, I think, quite a difficult thing to kind of cost and appraise. Like, how much does a bag of cement cost? How many bags of cement do you actually need for a building? And then you've got all that special equipment, the cement mixers and the jackhammers and the grinders and the kind of big guys with hammers and stuff, and it's all really macho and intense. Timber is actually, it's just kind of pine fresh. It arrives on the back of a truck and gets screwed into place by cordless screwdrivers, by kind of civilized characters. It's not a kind of like, it's a very different kind of much more relaxed construction process.
No. This one's from Andrew Reynolds. Great presentation. Thank you, Andrew and Stewart. Can you please talk us through the cost and program comparison with, say, an all-steel frame office?
These are all architecty questions.
They were going to be. I mean, I'll go a little to it. I'm interested to hear the answers. Andrew, tell us.
Yeah, sorry. So no, we kind of. I mean, the thing is that when we when we started building in timber, started to get fascinated by the opportunities of engineered timber, 15, 20 years ago, we were not getting commissioned to build timber buildings. We were getting commissioned for projects and then having a discussion with our clients about the opportunity to do them in timber. So we have had to demonstrate over the years that they are more cost effective and that they are faster to build, and that and that you get a better quality building for it. So we've really had to hone our knowledge and our understanding, not only of our own discipline, but also how to cost buildings, how to program buildings, how to engage and collaborate with other consultants. So I think, for instance, in architecture, there has been a real issue over the last few decades where the nature of structural engineering has become one of problem solving rather than an engaged kind of design collaboration. So the architect comes up with an idea, they hand it to the engineer, says, fix this for me, I'm going for lunch. The engineer's got to sit and kind of problem solve. And problem solving is not designing. Problem solving is just sorting something out. So the idea that we collaborate very early on within engineering practice, and that we work very closely with them to really make sure that the building that we design together is one that is built around kind of efficiency and around material and structural understanding. Does that answer that?
Yeah, I think so. This one's from Colin Beattie, who's from our office at JRA. Hi, how does the building perform against the RIBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide, particularly with embodied and operational carbon?
Now that is a question that you should email me about, then I can give you those figures. I know that we've reported on that basis, and I think that those metrics are incredibly useful, and I think incredibly important to assess what you've been doing on those metrics and to see how you can improve. I would encourage people to use those metrics, but also to use common sense as well in design. I mean, we know what a low carbon building looks like. When you're doing something when you're not taking the carbon consequences in mind. We all know that. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple, and it's about enjoying space and light, materiality. It's all about kind of those things. It's not about shape making or cantilevers or kind of like, or individual expression. It's about actually really good occupier centric architecture, thinking about people that are going to be using it.
Colin's got a follow-up. Presumably timber won't offer the same thermal mass properties as concrete. However, is there enough thermal mass to help the building in terms of thermal comfort? So says, by the way, it's a beautiful building.
Thank you. So thermal mass is a really interesting question, and it's one that we debate a lot in the office and engage with other people on. So the idea that you have a big concrete structure, a big thermal mass, which you cool overnight, and then you use that coolth to help you over the daytime in order to kind of help cool the building, is obviously how thermal mass works. The timber building, you have a little bit of thermal mass in the timber, but not really very much. It's a very different thermal dynamic. It doesn't really get hot, and it doesn't really get cold. I mean, that if you hug a tree, which obviously we all do, hug it regularly, right? If you hug a tree in the winter, it's not cold, and if you sit on a wooden bench on a hot summer's day, it's not hot. So you don't get that kind of heat build-up or cold build-up that you get from a higher thermal mass. So it's not about a radiating heat or radiating cool. It's about keeping the air flowing through the building. And certainly if you look at a more of a kind of Eastern approach to architecture in a hot climate, it is about things that are lightweight, things that are breathable, things that are airy. So it's a different approach. I mean, the other thing as well is you don't have an afternoon's worth of hot concrete building to cool down either. So, you know, so actually I'm skeptical about that. I think it probably is another one of those situations where we've been doing something in the same way for 100 years, and so those are the metrics we know. That's what we understand how to do it, and so what we need, and so we have to apply the same rationale to what we're doing now, to the old metric, to the old way of doing things. And I think that actually reinvestigate when you, I mean, it's fascinating that changing a building material, you know, the implications of changing that are so manifest, not just through the process of construction, the process of design, but also the process of occupation. You know, and it just changes everything. And so it's, we learn and we learn and we learn.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for those fulsome responses. Regrettably, and I'd love to carry on actually, I'm going to have to draw things to a close as we approach 7:30. So I'm going to do a bit of domestic housekeeping here and just say thank you all for attending. I'm very pleased that we didn't have any technological challenges, and thank you to Colin Hill for assisting on that. He's been brilliant. He works with Stewart and British Land. And please do join us again for our next CAF event, which will be a talk on 21 Moorfields, a major oversight development in Moorgate, and Giles Martin from Wilkinson Eyre will be talking along with David Seal of the Robert Bird Group, and I'm sure that will be very interesting. They'll be in discussion with Michael Cassidy, so look forward to you joining us then, and thank you all. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks,